before I start tonight, I need you to do something for me. Not as a dramatic bit, not as a theatrical opener designed to set a mood. Actually do this right now, before we go any further. Look behind you, not a quick glance. Real look. Take 3 full seconds, turn your head, examine every corner of whatever room you're currently in, and confirm as specifically and thoroughly as you can that you are alone in it. I'll wait. Done good. Because here's the piece of information that is going to sit with you for the entire length of what we're about to cover tonight. In 8 of the 10 stories we are going through right now, the person at the center of it did exactly that. They looked around their space. They did a version of what you just did, with exactly the same degree of confidence and the exact same expectation of what they would find, and they were wrong. Not dramatically, catastrophically, jump scare wrong, not a figure lunging from a closet or a face at the window. Wrong in the specific, quiet, deeply corrosive way that is infinitely harder to recover from. The kind of wrong that means something has been present in your space long enough to develop a pattern, a routine. In 2 of tonight's cases, what can only be described as an active and considered intention toward the person sharing that space with them. Wrong in the way that, once you understand it, reframes every previous moment you spent feeling safe in a room you believed was empty, and asks you very quietly, very specifically, whether you were actually as alone as you thought. That is the quality of the 10 accounts we are covering tonight. My name is not important. What is important is this. The people in these 10 stories did not come forward easily, did not speak loudly, and in several cases took years before they told anyone what happened to them. Not because they doubted what they experienced, because they knew with a precision only available to people who had been on the inside of something genuinely inexplicable, that the telling would cost them something they could not get back. The assumption, shared by everyone around them, that the world operates exclusively according to rules everyone already understands. They told anyway. Tonight, we honor that by doing what stories demand, passing them forward. Check your doors. Recheck that room you just looked at. Welcome to True Terror Files Official. These are 10 haunting true horror stories that nobody was supposed to tell. Let's begin. Story 1 is The Night Visitor. What happened to a woman named Sylvia Marsh in Portland, Oregon, a widow of 4 years. She had lived alone since her husband passed away. For 18 months after his death, she found comfort in a strange nightly ritual. Hearing someone walk softly down the hallway to her bedroom door, pause for a moment, and then walk away. She told herself it was grief, memory, the mind recreating familiar sounds in the quiet of loss. But everything changed when her late husband's sister came to stay for a week, and on the 3rd morning, casually mentioned that she had heard someone walking through the house every night and had assumed it was Sylvia. Story 2 is The Extra Passenger, what a rideshare driver named UNG Cole experienced on a rural highway at 2:15 a.m. He picked up a woman he later described as completely ordinary, except for what happened when he reached the destination she had entered into the app. The GPS guided him there without issue. But when he arrived, the back seat of his car was empty. The fare had never been charged, and the destination address, when he checked it again in daylight, turned out to be a cemetery that had been closed for 40 years. Story 3 is The Missing Floor, the experience of a business traveler named Garrett who stayed at the same hotel in Louisville, Kentucky 4 times a year for 6 years. On his 22nd stay, he stepped off the elevator onto a floor that was not listed in the directory. The corridor looked identical to every other hallway in the building, except for the small asterisks beside every room number. From behind one of those doors, he heard a child crying. A child who could not have been there, in a room that, according to the hotel's structural and administrative records, did not exist. Story 4 is the recording. What happened to an independent true crime podcaster named David Fink? He recorded a solo episode at midnight in his home studio. At 2 a.m., he began editing and played the recording back. That's when he heard something impossible, his own voice continuing to speak after he had stopped recording. The voice described events that would happen to him the following day, events he could not have known. Events he wrote down before they occurred, and then watched unfold exactly as described. Story 5 is the letters that knew what Teresa Blackwood found in her late grandmother's attic while clearing the house after the funeral. Inside a sealed wooden box with her full name written on the lid were 47 letters addressed specifically to her. The letters described her adult life in astonishing detail: her career, her marriage, her children, her fears, and her happiest moments. Yet forensic analysis later dated the ink to approximately 35 years before Teresa was born. Story 6 is the trail camera, the footage a widowed father named Ray Alderman discovered on wildlife cameras mounted around his property in rural Tennessee. After his 16-year-old son died in an accident, Ray began reviewing the footage obsessively. On the camera facing the eastern tree line at dusk on 41 different evenings across 6 months, a figure appeared. The same height, the same build, same posture as his son, standing silently at the edge of the trees, facing the house, before disappearing again. Story 7 is the neighborhood, the experience of the Reyes family who moved to a rural community in Western Virginia. Over 8 months, they became close friends with the Hawthorns, a warm, respected family who lived on the hill outside town and seemed deeply involved in the community. But when the Reyes family tried to send them a Christmas card, they discovered something chilling. The house on that hill had been vacant since 1994, when the Hawthorne family died in a house fire that destroyed most of the interior. Story 8 is the daycare child, what a preschool teacher named Livia Strand experienced with a quiet 4-year-old student named Mara. During free play, Mara calmly described events happening to strangers in real time. At first, Olivia dismissed it as imagination, until those events began verifying themselves. A colleague's car accident, a parent losing their job, a house fire described while the family was still inside, calling 911. Story 9 is the voicemail. What Adrienne Park discovered on her phone after returning home from work one Thursday evening? There was a voicemail from her own number, left earlier that afternoon, in her own voice. The message calmly described a violent break-in that had not yet happened, detailing the intruder's clothing, its entry point, and exactly where she would be in the apartment. Police took the message seriously enough to station a patrol car outside her building. At 11:43 p.m. that same night, the intruder almost arrived exactly as described. In Story 10, the photograph, the account that lingers longer than the rest. When Vincent Albaret opened a storage box labeled with his birth year and his late mother's unit, he found a single black and white photograph from a picnic he didn't recognize. The people were strangers, yet standing in the background was Vincent himself. Same face, same build, even the scar on his chin from a bicycle accident at 14. The photograph had been printed and stored more than a decade before he was born. 10 stories. Let's begin. Sylvia Marsh had been a widow for 4 years when she first told anyone about the footsteps. 4 years of living alone in the house she and her husband Dennis had. Shared for 31 years in a quiet neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. For years of adjusting to the particular silence that a house develops after it loses a person. It is not, no matter what well-meaning people tell you, the same as the silence that existed before. It is an absence rather than a quality and negative space, shaped exactly like whoever used to fill it. Dennis had died of a sudden cardiac event in March of the first year, quickly and without warning. Sylvia, who was 61, a retired librarian, and a deeply practical woman, organized her grief with the same systematic care she had applied to her professional life. She moved through the expected stages with a thoroughness that impressed her friends and slightly frightened her children, the way controlled grief sometimes does. By the end of the first year, she had reached something that was not exactly peace, but at least a workable version of the life that remained. The footsteps began in what she later calculated was the 14th month. She could not be completely certain because at first she had not registered them as remarkable. Dennis had always checked on her at night. Not every night, not as a strict ritual, but often enough to become a habit. He was a light sleeper, and sometimes in the early hours he would walk quietly down the hallway to the bedroom door. He would not open it. He would simply pause there for a moment. The way people pause at thresholds when they are checking on someone they love, but do not want to wake. Then he would turn and walk back down the hallway. Sylvia had always sensed this without fully waking. It had been one of the quiet textures of their marriage, one of those ordinary intimacies people only recognize after they disappear. So when she began sensing it again, the soft footsteps in the hallway, the pause at the bedroom door, the retreat her sleeping mind filed it automatically under Dennis. That is what sleeping minds do with familiar things. She did not question it seriously until one night when she was fully awake at 2 a.m. and heard it clearly. Footsteps. Slow and even. Moving down the hardwood hallway from the direction of the living room. Stopping outside her bedroom door. Silence for perhaps 15 seconds. Then the quiet retreat back down the hallway. She lay in the dark with her heart steady because she was a practical woman. She considered the explanations available to her, the house settling, the expansion and contraction of old hardwood floors in winter, auditory pareidolia, the tendency of a grieving brain to impose familiar patterns onto random sounds. She chose one of those explanations and went back to sleep. She chose one of those explanations for 18 months. Then Dennis's sister Carol came to stay for a week in November. Carol slept in the guest room at the opposite end of the hallway from Sylvia's bedroom. On the third morning of her visit, she came into the kitchen, poured coffee, and said carefully that she had noticed someone moving through the house during the night. She had assumed it was Sylvia getting water or adjusting the thermostat, and she asked if Sylvia had been sleeping well. Sylvia looked across the kitchen table at her sister-in-law and said, with the careful precision of someone who has been avoiding a statement for a very long time, that she had not been getting up during the night. Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she asked what the footsteps sounded like. Sylvia described them, the pace, the route through the hallway, the pause outside the bedroom door. Carol slowly set down her coffee cup with the deliberate care of someone managing a physical reaction. "'Cause," she said very quietly, what Sylvia had just described was the exact pace, sound, and route Dennis had walked through that house every night for the 31 years Carol had been visiting. Sylvia still lives in the house. She says she has no intention of leaving. The footsteps still come occasionally soft, unhurried, stopping outside her door before turning back down the hallway in the exact rhythm of the man she was married to for 31 years. She says she has made a deliberate decision to interpret them not as a haunting, but as a continuation. She admits she knows that is not a rational position. She says she does not currently need it to be. Marcus Cole had been driving for a rideshare platform for 3 years when the night happened. Not a driver who scared easily, not a man given to imagination. Former Army logistics specialist who had spent his post-service years building a methodical, disciplined civilian life and who chose rideshare work for its flexibility and its fundamental simplicity. The app assigns a pickup. You go to the pickup, you drive the person to where they're going, you get paid, the record exists in the platform, in your phone, in the bank, and nowhere mysterious. He had driven close to 8,000 trips before the Thursday in February, when he got a pickup request at 2:15 a.m. on a stretch of rural highway outside the city. Not an unusual request. Not inherently alarming. Late-night runs on rural routes happen especially on weekends, when bars close and transit stops. And Marcus had done dozens of them without incident, enough to have a routine for the particular quiet of a late rural pickup. The pin was on the shoulder of the highway, which also happened occasionally. People catching rides from unusual locations, and Marcus pulled onto the shoulder and waited the standard 2 minutes, and was about to cancel when the back door opened and a woman got in. She was, as he described her to the detective who interviewed him 3 weeks later, completely unremarkable. Mid-30s, dark coat, quiet, polite. She said thank you when she got in, confirmed the destination that was already in the app, and settled into the back seat with the specific economy of movement of a person accustomed to ride. Shares who knows not to make conversation if the driver isn't offering it. Marcus was not offering it at 2:15 a.m. and she did not push. He drove. The destination was 42 minutes away on the routing the app gave him, south and east, through a stretch of roads he knew well enough, a route that eventually brought him to a narrow lane between 2 tree lines and then to an open area in front of a low stone wall. He stopped at the destination, looked in the rearview mirror to let the passenger know they'd arrived, and the back seat was empty. Not vacated, she hadn't opened the door. He would have heard it, the interior light would have triggered. Empty in the way a car is empty before anyone has been in it. The seat undisturbed. The seatbelt fully retracted. Nothing on the seat. Marcus sat in the car on a dark lane in February at 3:07 a.m. for approximately 4 minutes, applying the same methodical assessment he applied to everything, and then he drove home and went to bed. The morning he opened the app to check his earnings, as the trip was not there, not completed without payment, not canceled, not error, not there. No record of a pickup request at 2:15 a.m. on the highway, no record of the fare, no record of the destination. He called the platform's driver support line and described the trip. The representative told him there was no trip in the system at that time from that location, and suggested his app. May have had a display error. Marcus drove back to the destination address in daylight. The lane was real. The stone wall was real. Beyond the wall was a cemetery, not a municipal cemetery, an old private cemetery, the kind associated with a family rather than a community, the headstones weathered and unlabeled from the road. He has submitted the location details to the platform 4 times. Each time the response confirms no trip was initiated from that location. He has driven 800 additional trips since then, and has not had a pickup request after midnight. He's never told the full version of this story to his family, because he does not know how to tell it in a way that ends in a place he himself can live with. And he says that is the most honest thing he can tell you about it. that there is no version of the telling that returns him to the worldview he had before 2:15 a.m. on that February Thursday, and that he misses that worldview the way you miss a particular quality of sleep once you stop having it. Garrett Ellison was the kind of business traveler who had stripped the experience of hotels to pure function. He had the same brand of earplugs, same travel-sized toiletries, the same specific requests filed in every reservation. And he had stayed at the same mid-range hotel in Louisville, Kentucky, at least 4 times per year for 6 years, accumulating enough stays to know the building the way you know a place you have spent more total nights in than you care to calculate. He knew the elevator quirks. It ran slow to the 7th floor. It made a sound on deceleration that new guests found alarming and regulars ignored. And he knew the corridor layout and the ice machine locations, and the particular darkness of the rooms on the north side versus the south, and the way the breakfast service smelled from the elevator on a Tuesday morning. He was, in short, a person for whom this building held no surprises. On his 22nd stay, a Wednesday night in September, he got into the elevator at the lobby at 11:30 p.m., pressed 8 for his floor, and rode up. The elevator stopped at what it indicated was the 6th floor. The doors opened. Garrett, who had not pressed 6 and was not on his way to 6, looked out at the corridor and stepped forward to check whether someone had called the elevator from this floor, and then left a small irritation. Nothing more. He stepped out. The corridor was identical to every other corridor in the building. Same carpet pattern, same wall fixtures, same room number plates on every door, except every room number had an asterisk after it. Not a standard typographical feature, not part of the hotel's branding. An asterisk, printed or affixed on each plate beside the number in a font that didn't quite match the numerals, as if added separately, deliberately, by someone who wanted to indicate a distinction without naming it. Garrett stood in the corridor and noted this for approximately 10 seconds, which was enough time to also note the silence. A hotel corridor at 11:30 p.m. is not silent. There is always the distant bass of a television, a faucet, movement behind closed doors, and this corridor was silent in the complete sealed way of a space that is not occupied rather than a space whose occupants are quiet. Then he heard it, from behind the door marked 614 asterisk. The room directly across from where he was standing, the sound of a child crying, not screaming, not distressed, just crying. The sustained and rhythmic crying of a very young child who has been crying for some time and is not expecting to be heard. Garrett is not a person who ignores a child crying. He knocked. The crying continued without alteration, as if the knock had occurred in a different reality. He knocked again, harder, and said, "Is anyone in there?" And the crying continued at the same pace and volume, without any of the pause or modulation that a child's cry makes when it registers external sound. He went back to the elevator, rode to the lobby, and went to the front desk. He described the floor, the asterisked room numbers, the child. The desk agent looked at him with an expression he described as careful, not confused, not alarmed, careful, and told him that the 6th floor was undergoing renovation and was closed to guests and had been for the past month. Garrett said he had just been standing on it. The desk agent said that was not possible, as the elevator did not service that floor during renovation and there was no guest access. Garrett rode the elevator back to 6. The elevator went from 5 to 7 without stopping. The button for 6 was present, but did not respond when pressed. He has stayed at that hotel twice since, as recently as last spring. Because canceling a hotel affiliation over something you cannot explain feels like conceding to it, And Garrett is not a person who concedes two things he cannot explain. He says the sixth floor now behaves exactly as the sixth floor should. He says he has stood in the corridor on 6 and examined every room number plate and confirmed they are standard, consistent, and asterisk-free. He says the only version of the story he has found to be internally coherent is that he was somewhere he was not supposed to be, that someone or something in that building understood that, and that the correction was made efficiently and without malice. He says he finds this the most unsettling possible interpretation, but also the one that fits all the facts, and that he is a man who goes where the facts lead. David Fink had been producing an independent true crime and horror narration podcast for 2 years when it happened to solo operation, recorded in his home studio in the guest bedroom of his apartment in Chicago. Set up modest enough to embarrass, but functional enough to have built him an audience of 40,000 subscribers who returned every Thursday for a new episode and who had, over 27 months of consistent output, developed exactly the kind of loyalty that small independent creators depend on, and that depends, in turn, on the creator's consistent presence and reliability. David was reliable. He recorded on Tuesday nights, edited on Wednesdays, published on Thursdays, and had not missed a single week in 2 years. The Tuesday night in question was October, past midnight. The episode, a particularly dense one about a series of unexplained disappearances in the Pacific Northwest that required a longer recording session than usual. He finished at approximately 1:40 a.m., said his standard outro stopped the recording software, and sat in his studio chair for a few minutes, with the lights up and the monitor glow and the specific post-recording flatness of a person who has been performing emotional engagement for 2 hours and is now simply a person in a chair. Then he loaded the recording into his editing software to begin the preliminary cleanup, removing breath sounds, tightening pauses, the muscle memory first pass he had done 100 times, and pressed play. The recording was correct for approximately 47 minutes. His voice, his content, his exact recording of the episode. At the 47-minute mark, where he had wrapped the main narrative and was moving into the outro, his voice in the recording continued. Not a different voice. His voice with his cadence, his vocabulary, his specific verbal patterns, continuing past the outro into content he had not recorded, narrating events in the present tense. What his own voice narrated over the following 11 minutes of a recording he had not made was the following day. Not in broad strokes, in specific, granular, quotidian detail, that he would wake at 9:15 a.m. rather than his usual 8 and feel disoriented. That his neighbor would knock on his door to return a package. That he would receive a work email he had been waiting 3 weeks for, and that it would not contain the answer he was hoping for. That he would go to the coffee shop on the corner rather than making coffee at home because he was out of filters. That the person behind the counter would be someone new he hadn't seen before. And that on his way home from the coffee shop, he would find an object on the sidewalk outside his building that would cause him to stop and stand still for several minutes. David sat in his studio at 2 a.m. listening to his own voice describe the following day with the flat journalistic precision of a narrator reporting established fact. When the voice reached the part about the object on the sidewalk, it stopped. The recording ended. David did what any person with a rational framework and a podcasting background and a deep commitment to the idea that strange phenomena have explicable sources would do. He went through every technical possibility, every software glitch, every scenario in which a recording he had not made could appear appended to one he had. He found no mechanism. He transcribed the full 11 minutes in a document on his phone, timestamped it, and went to bed. The following day, he woke at 9:15. The neighbor knocked. The email came and did not contain what he needed. He went to the coffee shop because he was out of filters. There was a new person behind the counter. On the pavement outside his building, half hidden against the base of the doorstep, was a photograph face down, the edges slightly damp, and when he picked it up and turned it over, it was a photograph of him, taken at a distance he could not identify from an angle that suggested height above him in clothing he had worn 3 weeks earlier. He stood on the sidewalk for 4.5 minutes. He has the time-stamped document. He still has the photograph. He has not published the recording. He says he has listened to those 11 minutes 112 times, and that the voice is his. Not a convincing imitation, not a synthesis, his. With a familiarity only available to someone who has spent 2 years listening to recordings of themselves. And that what disturbs him most about it is not the accuracy of what it predicted, but the tone, calm, measured, the voice of a narrator covering settled material, the voice of someone who already knows how the story ends. Teresa Blackwood was 43 years old, a high school biology teacher in Tucson, Arizona. When her grandmother passed at the age of 91, Eleanor Blackwood, a woman of formidable, quiet intelligence who had raised Teresa's father alone in rural New Mexico after her husband's early death, who had been a constant and significant presence in Teresa's childhood, through her early adulthood before the geographic distance of Teresa's adult life had reduced their contact to holidays and phone calls, who had died peacefully in the kind of old age that feels earned rather than merely reached. Teresa drove to New Mexico to help her father clear the house, a 3-day process she had prepared herself for emotionally and practically, and had worked through most of it without crisis. The furniture, the clothing, the kitchen, until she reached the attic on the afternoon of the second day and found, among the boxes of expected material, a wooden box approximately the size of a large shoebox, sealed with a small brass latch, with a strip of adhesive paper across the top on which her grandmother had written, in her careful and distinctive cursive, Teresa's full legal name, not her father's name, not the family name. Teresa's full name, first, middle, and last. The box had been placed at the very back of the attic, behind a wardrobe that required 2 people to move, in a position that indicated it had been placed there deliberately and that its retrieval had been considered unlikely to be accidental. Teresa opened it. Inside were 47 envelopes, unsealed, each with Teresa's name on the front and a date on the back, not a mailing date. A date in her grandmother's handwriting that she did not initially understand the significance of. The letters inside each envelope were written on her grandmother's personal stationery and her grandmother's handwriting. This was confirmed later by 2 handwriting analysts and by Teresa's father, who had grown up watching his mother write and who identified the handwriting immediately and without hesitation. The letters described Teresa's life, not in the vague, encouraging generalities of a grandmother writing to a future grandchild in specific. Contemporary, intimate detail, Teresa's career as a biology teacher, the specific classroom she had taught in for 11 years, the name of the colleague she considered her closest friend at the school, the specific nature of the conflict she had experienced in her second year of teaching that had almost made her leave the profession, her marriage, and the particular qualities of her husband that she valued most, and the particular tension that recurred between them, and the way they had learned to navigate it, the names and personalities of her 2 children. A medical situation she had experienced at 37 that she had not shared with any member of her family, a fear she had carried privately since her 20s that she had told no one. The dates on the back of each envelope, the dates that Teresa had not initially understood, were, she realized after the third letter, dates from her own life. The date her marriage certificate was signed, the date her first child was born, the date of the medical situation at 37. Dates from a life lived by a woman who was not born until 9 years after the earliest letter was written. A forensic document examiner retained at considerable cost confirmed the ink and paper of the letters to be consistent with materials available in the mid-1970s. The earliest letter was written in 1976. Teresa was born in 1982. She has read every letter. She says she will not describe the contents of the final letter, the one dated with a date that has not yet arrived in her own life, because she does not want to know whether it is accurate, and because she has decided that living toward it without knowing what it says is the closest she can come to respecting the act of writing it. She says her grandmother was not a mystical person, was in fact one of the most rigorously practical people she has ever known. She says she has no explanation, and that arriving at no explanation after sufficient examination feels different, more final, and more serious than simply not trying. She says the box is in her house. She says she will never put it back in an attic. Ray Alderman had been a widower for 6 years, and a father alone for 6 years, and had managed both of those things with the specific dignity of a rural Tennessean of his generation who believes that grief is private, that survival is a form of respect, and that the land around you, its rhythms, its wildlife, its seasonal reliability constitutes a form of company that asks nothing and offers something real. He had 300 acres in the eastern part of the state, land his family had held for 4 generations. He had managed it with the care of a man who genuinely loved it, which included the deer management that had led him, 3 years before the night in question, to install a network of 8 trail cameras mounted at strategic points across his property, cameras with infrared sensors, triggered by motion, time-stamped, the kind of equipment used by serious hunters and wildlife researchers and property owners who want to know what moves on their land in the dark hours they can't observe themselves. His son Tyler had helped him install the cameras, had thought them impressive and slightly excessive, had said so with the particular affectionate skepticism of a 16-year-old observing a parent's enthusiasm for a hobby. Tyler died in October of an accidental drowning in the creek that ran along the eastern boundary of the property. A death, swift and documented, and that offered no mystery beyond the fundamental and unanswerable mystery of how a strong 16-year-old swimmer can be taken by a creek he has walked beside his entire life. A mystery that Ray declined to interrogate because there was no answer available and because he understood. In the manner of a man who has lost both a wife and a child, that some losses do not offer the comfort of reason. He continued managing the property. He continued checking the trail cameras, weekly at first and then compulsively, in the way that grieving people often attach themselves to routines that their lost person was present for, because the routine is a kind of ongoing conversation. He reviewed the footage from the camera nearest the creek, camera 3, mounted on an oak 12 feet from the water 6 months after Tyler's death, reviewing footage from the period of October through March, running through hundreds of hours of deer, fox, raccoon, the occasional coyote, the expected catalog of what moves through eastern Tennessee land at night. In the footage from camera 3, beginning in November and continuing through the end of the archive, appearing consistently at dusk on 41 separate evenings and never at any other time, a figure standing at the tree line 10 feet from the creek bank, facing toward the house. Stationary in each clip, appearing in the first triggered frame and absent from the frame that followed, which meant whatever triggered the camera was registering his motion, despite the figure's stillness, the sensor picking up something it classified as movement and something that appeared to the eye as perfectly still. The figure was the height Tyler had been at 16. The build Tyler had been at 16. And it stood the specific way Tyler had stood when he was looking at something far away. Weight shifted slightly to the left. One shoulder dropped, a physical habit so distinctive that Ray's sister-in-law, watching the footage on Ray's laptop, put her hand over her mouth before he had said anything about who he thought it was. Ray has shown the footage to 2 wildlife biologists, a hunting guide with 30 years of experience on Tennessee land, and a private investigator he hired specifically to find an alternative explanation. None of them have provided one. The wildlife biologists ruled out every animal of the approximate height. The hunting guide said he had never seen any natural animal produce that silhouette from that posture. The private investigator's report concluded that the figure was of human size and shape and offered no further assessment. Camera 3 has not captured the figure since March, the end of the 6-month window in which it appeared. Ray still checks the footage. He checks it every week, the way he always has. Because the land is still his, and Tyler helped him set the cameras up, and it still feels, in the specific, quiet way that the most important things feel, like something they do together. The Reyes family moved to Caldwell's Creek, Virginia. In June, Marco and Diana and their 2 daughters, 9 and 11, drawn by the combination of affordable land, a school district with a good reputation, and the particular appeal that small, rooted communities hold for families who have spent years in cities and have arrived at the conclusion that something is missing from a life lived at that density and that pace. Caldwell's Creek was small, 300 residents, 1 general store, 1 church, a volunteer fire department, and it operated with the self-aware coherence of a community that has existed in more or less the same form for long enough that the rhythms of it are deeply established and the social fabric is dense and specific and makes immediate room for newcomers in the way that genuinely secure communities do. Not from obligation, but from a kind of settled confidence. The Reyes family were welcomed warmly, learned names quickly, and within 2 months felt, with the pleasant surprise of people who had prepared themselves to feel like outsiders for much longer, genuinely part of the community. In those first 2 months, they heard about the Hawthorns constantly, the family on the hill. The old farmhouse at the edge of the property overlooking the creek, John and Margaret Hawthorne, and their 2 adult children, who had returned to help run the family farm, a fixture of the town in the way that oldest families always are. Their name came up in virtually every extended conversation, the Hawthorns' apple crop, John Hawthorne's role in a road dispute with the county 15 years back, Margaret's famous involvement in the church fundraising, the way the family had maintained the hill property for 3 generations. Marco and Diana asked to be introduced. Their neighbors said, of course, they'd arrange it, and somehow the specific occasion never materialized. The way introductions to old families sometimes don't quite happen until they simply do. In September, Diana attempted to send a community directory card, a custom in Caldwell's Creek, a printed card sent to new neighbors with contact information to the Hawthorne address. It was returned, not by the postal service, but placed back in the mailbox, the envelope unopened. She mentioned this at the general store. The proprietor, an 80-year-old woman named Lucille, who had operated the store since 1971. When still in a way Diana would later describe as the kind of stillness that precedes very careful speech, She asked Diana which family she was trying to reach. Diana said the Hawthorns, the family on the hill. Lucille looked at her for a long moment and then said that the Hawthorne house had been vacant since 1994. That the Hawthorne family, John and Margaret and their 2 children, had died in a fire that took the interior of the farmhouse in December of that year. That the structure had been condemned the following spring. That the property had sat untouched in the estate for 30 years because there was no surviving family to inherit it and no buyer willing to take it at the price the estate required. Diana came home and told Marco. Marco called 3 other families in the community and asked about the Hawthorns. Every person he spoke to knew the Hawthorns, described them in the same warm, specific terms, and when he told them what Lucille had said. Each conversation produced the same quality of pause, long, searching. The pause of a person who is examining a memory they have always accepted as straightforward and finding, for the first time, that they cannot locate it with the specificity the examination requires. No one could name a specific recent occasion on which they had actually spoken to a Hawthorne. No one could identify a specific time or place. The family existed, fully formed and socially present in the community's collective memory, and no one could point to a concrete, verifiable, specific interaction more recent than 30 years ago.
Wow.
The Reyes family still live in Caldwell's Creek. The farmhouse on the hill is visible from their back property line, and the girls have been told not to go near it, which they have largely respected. Marco says the thing he cannot resolve is not the family. He has made a kind of peace with not understanding that. He says the thing he cannot resolve is this: that every person in a community of 300 has a detailed, warm, specific set of memories of a family that has been dead for 30 years, and that those memories feel exactly, precisely, completely like the real thing. He says that is the most precise definition of a haunting he has ever encountered. He says he cannot find a flaw in it. Olivia Strand had been teaching preschool for 9 years when Mara enrolled a 4-year-old girl a few words and deep attention. The kind of child who observes everything in a room before engaging with any of it. The kind of child who, Olivia noted in her first-week assessment, appeared to be listening to things that were not currently in the room. She had seen this quality in children before, a particular inward focus that sometimes signals exceptional imagination and sometimes signals a child who has learned early that the outer world is unpredictable and that the inner one is safer. And she approached Mara with the patient, consistent warmth she brought to every child who needed time rather than stimulation, and waited for the girl to find her way toward engagement at her own pace. Mara's engagement came in October, 6 weeks into the school year, during the free choice period after lunch, when the children were permitted to draw, build, or sit quietly. Mara sat quietly, which was not unusual, but she also began to narrate in a low, calm voice, directed at nothing in particular, as if she were reading from something only she could see, descriptions of what she called things that were happening. At first, Olivia dismissed these narrations as the imaginative play that preschoolers are not always distinguishable from reality for, the kind of rich invented reportage that makes early childhood education endlessly interesting. Mara said that Mrs. Park's car had made a loud sound and stopped, and Mrs. Park was standing on the road. Mrs. Park was the 4th grade teacher down the hall, who at that hour was supposedly in her classroom teaching. Olivia mentioned this to a colleague at the end of the day without weight, as a piece of charming 4-year-old storytelling. The colleague told her that Mrs. Park had in fact broken down on the highway that morning during her commute, and had been 40 minutes late to school. Olivia recalibrated, but did not alarm herself. There were explanations for a child having absorbed that information secondhand. A week later, Mara said during Free Choice that Maya's dad had to leave his job and that Maya would be sad soon. Maya was a student in the class. Her father lost his job that week. The family did not discuss this with the school. It emerged only when Maya's behavior changed and Olivia called home. Mara said it before it was school knowledge. Mara said it before it was common knowledge. Mara said in February, quietly and without alarm, that the yellow house on Terrace Street was getting very hot and the people inside needed to get out right now. Olivia did not have a protocol for this. She called the front office. The front office called the fire department as a precaution, the kind of call that is embarrassing if nothing comes of it. Something came of it. A faulty space heater in a house 4 blocks from the school had started a fire in the interior wall, detected before it broke through to open flame because a fire unit arrived while it was still contained. 3 adults and a dog were evacuated. No one was hurt. Olivia asked Mara, after that, carefully and without alarm, how she knew about these things. Mara thought about this for a moment, with the specific seriousness of a 4-year-old considering a real question. Then she said she could see the threads. Olivia asked what the threads looked like. Mara said they were like strings that connected to everything, and she could see where they went. Olivia asked if she could always see them. Mara said yes, always, and that it was sometimes loud, and that she liked school because when she was doing things she could see less of them. She did not appear troubled by this. She appeared in the specific way that children sometimes appear when they describe the details of their inner lives, relieved to have been asked. Mara moved away at the end of the school year when her family relocated, and Olivia did not see her again. She has spent 6 years since carrying this account and applying to it every framework she can access: cognitive, developmental, statistical, and she says the only conclusion she can reach honestly is that she was in the presence of something she cannot name, that it was fully present in a 4-year-old girl in a preschool classroom.
Hi.
And that the 4-year-old girl was managing it better than the adults around her would have. Adrian Park was 28 years old, a graphic designer working remotely, living in a second-floor apartment in a mid-sized city in Georgia. A careful, self-aware, analytically minded young woman who had taken deliberate steps in her adult life to build a version of security that she had not always had access to. A good lock on her door, a camera in the lobby, neighbors she knew by name. The specific infrastructure of someone who has thought carefully about safety and made concrete choices in response to those thoughts. She came home from a coffee shop at 5:22 p.m. on a Thursday in October to find 3 missed calls on her phone, 2 from numbers she knew, 1 from her own number. She has described the moment of seeing her own number in her missed calls as a moment she initially categorized as a butt dial or a technical error before she noticed that the unknown call from her number had left a voicemail. She stood in the hallway of her apartment and pressed play. The voice on the voicemail was hers, not a voice like hers. Her voice, the voice she hears in recordings of herself. The specific quality of it that she had spent years noticing in the way that everyone notices their recorded voice, with the slight estrangement of a self-image confronting its external reality. The voicemail had been left at 3:17 p.m. to 2 hours before she arrived home. She had been in the coffee shop at 3:17 p.m., working her phone on the table in front of her, and had not made any call. Her voice on the voicemail was calm, focused, and spoke in the present tense. It said, "There is someone coming to the apartment tonight. He will come through the kitchen window, the one she leaves unlatched, because the mechanism sticks. She knew exactly which window. He will be there between 11 p.m. and midnight." He will be wearing a dark jacket and a gray cap. He has a specific way of checking whether anyone is home before he enters. 2 knocks, then a pause, then 1. She listened to the full voicemail twice. It was 1 minute and 43 seconds long and contained 7 specific descriptive details about an event that had not yet happened. Adrienne called the police. She says she expected skepticism and received instead a detective who listened to the voicemail recording without expression and said he was going to take it seriously and that she should not be in the apartment that night. She stayed with a friend. A patrol unit sat outside her building. At 11:51 p.m., a man in a dark jacket and a gray cap approached her building. He knocked twice on the lobby door, paused, knocked once. The officer in the patrol unit approached him before he could proceed. He was arrested. In the subsequent investigation, it was established that he had targeted 3 other apartments in the city using the same entry method. Adrienne's apartment was the only one where law enforcement was present before he arrived. Adrienne has not returned to that apartment. She has retained the voicemail recording. She has submitted it to 2 cybersecurity experts and a telecommunications specialist, none of whom has identified a mechanism by which a call could originate from a number from which no call was placed. She says the detail that she cannot stop returning to is the kitchen window, the one she left unlatched because the mechanism stuck. A small domestic fact known only to her. A fact that no one monitoring her externally could have known because it tells her that whoever or whatever left that voicemail was not observing her from outside. It tells her it knew the inside. Vincent Albaret was 13 years old when his mother passed. A quiet and private woman named Ruth who had raised him alone in western Pennsylvania and who had in the particular manner of a parent who has been their child's entire world and who recognizes that this is both a gift and a burden, kept significant portions of her inner life to herself in a way that Vincent had respected without fully understanding. He spent 2 weekends clearing her apartment, and one afternoon at the storage unit she had maintained on the edge of town, a 10 by 10 space packed with the organized density of a woman who never threw anything away and who had a system for everything. The boxers labeled, the rows consistent, the logic of it immediately apparent to anyone who knew her. He worked through the storage unit methodically, opening boxes and assessing contents, separating what would stay in the family from what would go to donation, until he reached the far wall in the last row of boxes, where a single cardboard box sat apart from the others, positioned in a way that suggested intentionality rather than overflow. The box was sealed with a strip of packing tape and labeled in his mother's handwriting, with his birth year minus 1986, and nothing else. Vincent opened it. Inside was a single object, a black and white photograph, printed on the heavy paper stock of mid-century photography, the kind of photograph that was made to last. The photograph showed a family gathering, a summer picnic. From the light and the clothing and the informal arrangement of people around a table in what appeared to be a backyard, 30 or 40 people of varying ages, the kind of large and relaxed family gathering that produces photographs exactly like this one. Vincent did not recognize the yard. He did not recognize the table or the occasion or scanning the faces, any of the people. And then he reached the back of the group, the left edge of the photograph, where a figure stood slightly apart from the others, looking not at the camera, but at something beyond the frame to the left, and he stopped. The figure was him, not someone who resembled him. His face, his build, his specific posture when he was standing at ease and thinking about something else, and on his chin, visible in the photograph despite the distance and the black and white rendering. Scar, the scar he had carried since he was 14, acquired when he fell from a bicycle on a gravel road and caught the handlebar on the way down. A scar he had had for 25 years that no photograph of him before the age of 14 could contain. The photograph's reverse bore a date stamp from a processing lab, processed in 1979, 7 years before Vincent was born, 3 years before the bicycle accident that produced the scar. He has had the photograph authenticated. The paper, the processing chemistry, the printing method, all consistent with the late 1970s. He has shown it to his father, who walked away from the relationship before Vincent was born, and who, at Vincent's direct request, examined it and confirmed that he did not recognize anyone in it, and that the figure at the back was to his eye, his son. Vincent has spent 2 years attempting to locate the yard, the people, the family documented in the photograph. He has found nothing. Does not know how the photograph came to be in that box, in that storage unit, in that particular position alone. Labeled only with the year of his birth, as if his mother had known it belonged to him without knowing what it meant, and had kept it. Faithfully and quietly, in the way she had kept so many things, she did not have the language to explain. He says the question he returns to is not the scar, though the scar is impossible. The question he returns to is this: if the photograph was taken in 1979, in a yard he has never been in, at a gathering he has no memory of, then where was he, or whatever version of him was standing at the back of that group, and what was he looking at, just outside the frame, that had taken his attention so completely away from a camera pointed directly at him? He says he has not found an answer. He says he suspects the answer is the kind that, once found, changes the nature of every other answer you've ever had. He says he is in no hurry. 10 stories. And here is what I want to leave you with. The thread I keep pulling at when I try to make sense of what we've covered tonight, because I don't think sense is available. It's not clean sense, not the kind that snaps into place and resolves the tension and lets you breathe out and go back to your life unchanged. What I think is available, and what I find myself returning to after every account like the 10 we just shared, is something simpler and stranger and more important than sense. The fact that every single one of these 10 people, Sylvia, Marcus, Garrett, David, Teresa Ray, Marco and Diana, Olivia, Adrian, Vincent, every single one of them got up the next morning. Sylvia made coffee in the house. She will not leave. Marcus drove another trip, 800 more of them and counting. Garrett checked into the hotel again, same building, same elevator, because he refuses to concede to the inexplicable. David published the next episode on Thursday, as scheduled, because 40,000 people were waiting. Teresa is still teaching biology in Tucson, and the box with the letters is in her house, and she lives alongside it with the particular grace of someone who has accepted that some truths are too large to fit inside your understanding all at once. Ray checks the cameras every week, and the land is still his. The Reyes family is still in Caldwell's Creek. Olivia is still teaching. Adrienne is still designing, still working, still in the world with one fewer window left unlatched. And Vincent has the photograph, has it in his home, has looked at it 10,000 times, and he is here, 39 years old, entirely himself, standing in his own present tense, while something older than his own existence looks out from a black and white frame at a point just beyond what any camera can capture. This is what true Terror Files Official is built on, not the horror, the survival, not what broke them, what they did next. If you are here, if you made it through all 10 tonight, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Please subscribe. Tell us in the comments which of tonight's 10 stays with you, and it will stay with one of you differently than all the others. We promise. We read every comment. We are a small channel, and every person here is not a number to us. They're a person who chose to sit in the dark with us and trust us with their attention, and we do not take that lightly. We'll be back next. Until then, go check your windows. Every one of them, and the one you normally leave because the mechanism sticks. Tonight, lock that one too. This has been True Terror Files Official. Good night.